Your presence is no longer desired here. Please leave, you lazy individual. Who works from home? My sister said angrily, and even my parents agreed. Leave. I'm tired of a family that doesn't appreciate me and my dog. If they're going to act like that, then I'll do what I want. That's when I decided to get back at them. My name is Orla, and I'm 33 years old and single. I design websites as a freelancer, which means I can work from home using just my laptop. I have a spot in my house where I work, and I set my own schedule. Even though I had a good job, my parents started to interfere with my work about 2 years ago. One day, while I was working at home, my parents came over to visit. As soon as they walked in, they glanced around the room and began talking. Mom, this house is really spacious. It feels like we could live here too. You're right, there's even a spare room. Plus, it seems like a waste for Orla to live in such a big house alone. Yeah, let's do it. We're moving this weekend. My parents didn't even acknowledge me and made all the decisions without consulting me. I made it clear that I didn't want to live with them and said, "Hold on, I don't want to live with you guys." What are you talking about? My father's face turned red with anger, and he shouted, "You took control of this house, claiming it from your uncle, trying to make it yours. You've hit a new low." I simply had a conversation with Uncle, and he gave it to me. Don't try to justify yourself. In any case, our old house is crumbling. Your mother and I are moving in here this weekend. In reality, this house was a gift to me from my father's brother, my uncle, who always spoiled me. The ownership is still under my uncle's name, but he gave me permission to use it however I want. According to my father, our family home has deteriorated significantly, and it requires extensive renovations if we want to keep living there. My mother doesn't work, and my father's income isn't very high, so renovating the house isn't feasible for us. That's why they targeted the house I inherited from my uncle. I wasn't happy about it, but my parents had made up their minds to sell their own house and said they had nowhere else to go. I couldn't leave them stranded, so I reluctantly agreed to live with them. But as soon as they moved in, my parents started making sarcastic remarks. Hey, Orla, you're in your 30s already, right? Don't you think about settling down and getting married? I'm content with my job at the moment. If you keep saying things like that, you'll just push any potential suitors away. Why don't you take a cue from your sister? Well, my sister's marriage isn't exactly perfect, is it? But for now, I'm okay with how things are. At that point, my mother, who had been listening, chimed in. Hey, don't speak ill of your sister like that. Unlike you, she's married and has a job at a company. You know, I may not be married, but I'm doing just fine with my work too. You're always glued to your computer. Are you earning money through some sketchy methods? I earn my living through honest work. There's no need to be concerned. How dare you talk back to your mother? You're nothing like your sister. That's how it went. My parents kept comparing me to my sister. Yes, she has a job at a company, but she's only a temporary worker in an office position. I don't mean to belittle temp jobs, but I certainly make more money than she does. I understand that my parents' generation may not fully understand the idea of working from home, but it was still painful to constantly feel underestimated. Then one day, while I was preparing dinner, instead of my usually idle parents, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. To my surprise, it was my sister Mayla, carrying a lot of luggage. Ha, Mayla, what's happening? It's been a while. Kathy, this might seem sudden, but I'll be staying in this house from now on. I was taken aback and blurted out, huh? What a big house! If Uncle was giving it to someone, it should have been me. Wait, hold on, you're moving in starting today? I had no idea about this. Did Mom and Dad tell you? I got divorced, divorced. So, I'll be relying on you from now on. Ignoring my surprise, Mela went upstairs and claimed an empty room for herself. Despite my attempts to resist, my parents sided with Mela, and I felt powerless to stop it. From that point on, my stress only grew. After her divorce, Mela had quit her job and spent her days gossiping about me with our mother. "Hey, Mom, do you think this dress is cute?" "Oh, absolutely, Mela, you look so pretty. It suits you perfectly. Do you agree? It's definitely not something Kathy would wear, right?" "Well, Kathy is more on the simple side. That's probably why she's having trouble finding a job. She just stays home and plays online." "Mom, you can't just say things like that." As I was cooking dinner, they purposely made sure I could hear their conversation. I was itching to respond, but I knew that would just play into their hands. So, no matter what they said, I kept living without reacting. Then one day, a friend of mine had a litter of 4 puppies, and I decided to adopt one of them. I named him Max. He's a small black chihuahua with the most adorable round eyes. Whenever he looks at me, he wags his tail so hard it seems like it might fall off. Having a chihuahua has been a dream of mine since I was young. Working from home can get lonely, so I thought Max could provide some much-needed company. "From now on, your name is Max, okay?" Woof. I didn't really consult with my family. When I decided to adopt Max, after all, this is my house, and I'm the one who will be taking care of all the expenses for him, so I don't see why they should have any complaints. When I brought Max home, as expected, my parents and Mela started complaining. "Hey, we didn't know you were getting a dog." "That's right, dogs can be smelly, you know." "I can't stand bad smells, Kathy. How could you just bring a dog home without talking to us first?" "We didn't agree to this," they kept complaining. I firmly told them, firstly, I didn't just pick him up off the street. A friend gave him to me. Plus, I'm the one who's going to take care of all the expenses for Max, so there shouldn't be any problem. What I choose to have in my house is my business. If you have any complaints, you're welcome to leave. At first, they complained loudly, their faces red with anger, but within a few hours, they were completely won over by Max's cuteness and began showering him with affection. "Aren't you just adorable? Are you mommy's boy or daddy's? Or maybe sis, look this way, sweetheart." Wait a minute, what happened to their anger from just a moment ago? Was it all just a dream? My entire family became completely enamored with Max. From then on, they were always doting on him. Because of this, their animosity toward me decreased, and I could enjoy relatively peaceful days. Then, one day, an incident shattered this calmness. While I was out running an errand, I got a call from my sister Mela. "Hello, come back home immediately," she burst out. In response to my sister's sudden outburst, I asked what was wrong. She vented her frustration, yelling at me, "It's not what happened. Max made a mess on my clothes. What if they smell? I'll just wash them quickly, and they'll be fine. Besides, isn't it your fault for leaving your clothes on the floor?" "What? It's my fault? It's your lack of training, Max, that's to blame." "Enough. Max is still a puppy, you know. If you take him out for a walk, he won't make a mess at home. You said you were excited to walk Max today. Did you actually take him?" "Well, I was planning to take him later, and it's all because you didn't train him properly." "Then you should compensate me for the clothes," Mela demanded. As expected, when I arrived home, my sister was furious. Both my parents had been alerted, and they stood beside Mela glaring at me. Mela tossed the dirty clothes at me and started yelling again, "I'm going to make you pay for the cleaning, got it?" "Why should I?" "It's your fault for not taking him for a walk and leaving your clothes on the floor." "Shut up. Stop arguing back. This only happened because you brought this stupid dog home. What are you going to do about it?" Calling him a stupid dog. You were fond of him before. Isn't it harsh to label him that just because he had a small accident? It's your fault for not training him properly. Take responsibility. Why can't my family think beyond their own convenience? While I was appalled by my selfish sister, my parents interjected, "Hey, Kathy, shouldn't you at least apologize to Mela first?" That's correct. All of this chaos is because of that Max you brought home. Can both of you just stop already? Puppies are like babies. Can't you forgive them for making mistakes once in a while? Pathetic. This mess is all because of this dumb dog, Kathy. You made the right choice by not getting married if you were a mother. I doubt you'd raise a decent child. What? How could you say that? If you took him for walks properly and kept the house tidy, none of this would have happened. Finally, my sister raised her eyebrow and pointed at me, saying, "I've had enough. I don't want you or this stupid dog here. Get out of this house." What? Didn't you hear what I said? I said leave. We don't want a freeloader who works from home here. A freeloader who works from home? How can someone who's currently unemployed say such a thing? And who do they think is covering the household expenses? It's me. As I stood stunned by my sister's absurd remark, even my parents joined in. That's right, Orla. Leave this house. Your presence only brings us bad luck. You're a jinx, they insisted. All three of them kept insisting that I leave. In that moment, my anger boiled over. That's enough. I've had it. If this is how it's going to be, just wait and see. Fueled by a desire for revenge, I packed my belongings and left the house with Max. My sister's words only added to the tension. This is all because of you. If you had just done what I said, none of this would have happened. They still didn't grasp the severity of their situation, even though consequences awaited them. But I didn't care. Let them deal with it on their own. Hiding my smirk, I left the house with Max. As expected, a few days later, my sister called in a panic. "Kathy, please help. Something's wrong with the house." What's going on with the house all of a sudden? We were given until the end of this month to leave. So what's the issue? What do you mean, what's the issue? Why are we being told to leave? Well, I've made the decision to sell the house, I said. At my words, Mela seemed to freeze, her voice trembling. She barely managed to speak. What? What does that mean? You decided to sell it? You don't have the authority. Well, actually I do. You see, that house became mine a month ago. What? Yes, I officially inherited the house from my uncle, and yes, the title is in my name. It's no wonder Mela was shocked. I hadn't mentioned this to anyone. You're joking, right? Even if Uncle transferred the title to you, you can't just sell it like that. I was concerned too, but right after you told me to leave, I spoke with Uncle. He confirmed that the house is now yours, Orla. He said, do whatever you want. You should get away from that awful family as soon as you can. What? That can't be. Whether they had been listening to my conversation with Mela on speakerphone or not, my parents began to protest. Orla, stop this nonsense. We have nowhere else to go if we leave this house. That's correct. It's unthinkable to treat your own family like this. If you're a good daughter, show some respect to your parents. Respect? I questioned them quietly. What are you talking about? You've always favored Mela over me. Who do you think has been supporting your lives for the past few years? You all had nowhere to go, so I reluctantly let you move in with me. With an unusually firm tone, my parents were left speechless. Without waiting for a response, I continued, who treated me and Max like burdens and kicked us out? It was all of you, wasn't it? Trying to find happiness by forcing out the original resident is shameless. You people belong in hell. At my outburst, my father pleaded, "Please help us, we're sorry." "I don't care. Figure it out on your own, you fools," I replied, hanging up the phone with a loud click. Then, I blocked every family member's contacts. Seeing me raise my voice, Max looked up at me with a worried bark. "I'm sorry, Max, for shouting. It's okay now. I'll protect you. I'm really glad I could rescue you from that family that treated you so poorly." Later on, it seems my parents and sister were forced to leave the house at the last minute despite their desperate attempts to cling to it. With my father's meager income and my unemployed mother and sister, it's unlikely they can lead a decent life. Rumor has it that my sister is constantly being pressured by my parents to find a job. Their family dynamics seem to be deteriorating by the day. Although I have no interest in how they're doing, it's clear that their living situation has worsened since I left. It's a classic case of getting what they deserve. They brought it upon themselves. Meanwhile, I'm enjoying my days filled with joy with my beloved dog in a new pet-friendly apartment. I can work whenever I please, and there's no one to complain about it anymore. I can use my earnings solely for myself and my dog. I'm incredibly content with my life now. Max, let's head to the dog park today. Woof. Max seems more lively. Maybe it's because that noisy family is gone. From now on, I want to protect Max for the rest of our lives and lead a peaceful existence.
She's creating opportunities to meet me even now, and I have no idea how incredibly cute and lovely she is. She is the wife of James, my closest friend at the company. I've been working at my first job since graduating from college. And although I'm in a different department now, James was both my mentor at work and my senior in college. Now that his wife has become a significant part of my life, let me tell you about her. Her name is Sophia. She's of average height with a slender figure. Before having their son, she worked as an elementary school special skills teacher. Sophia has a gentle and kind way of speaking that makes everyone around her feel at ease. Our company is small, so we often have dinners with other departments. After one such dinner, we ended up at a karaoke bar, and James got so drunk we had to catch a taxi to his place. By the time we arrived, James had sobered up and called his wife to say he was bringing a colleague home and asked if we could have a drink together. I told James to rest at home, but he insisted on not sending me away without expressing his gratitude. When we arrived at James' apartment, I met his wife, Sophia, who is 3 years older than him. They got married right after James started his job. Sophia is 4 years older than me, the most beautiful woman with the best skin I've ever seen. It's so inspiring how James, having such a pretty and kind wife, makes me respect him even more. Sophia greeted me with a kind voice. It was late at night after a company dinner, and although she might have been upset with her husband for bringing a colleague home so late, she didn't say a single harsh word to him in front of me. Seeing Sophia uphold her husband's dignity made me want to find a woman like her and start a family someday. That night, we had cookies and wine that Sophia had prepared. It turns out, despite her innocent appearance, Sophia loves to drink. She was happy that her husband had asked to prepare some drinks, saying she was already thinking about having some. James couldn't stop bragging about his wife. Since she only works part-time, she spends a lot of time at home, and lately, she's been taking an interest in household management, even doing a complete cleanup. She told me that since I'm close with her husband, I should just call if I ever want to have a drink, and she'll prepare something if possible. I was always envious of my colleague James, who had a beautiful and kind-hearted wife. James, generous as he was, often invited me over to his house once a month, insisting that instead of staying home alone, we should spend some quality time together. So, I found myself bringing beer or desserts to James's place, making those visits a highlight of my month. I lived just a 15-minute walk from James's house. Since my parents lived in the countryside, I rented a place in the city, and having James in the same neighborhood meant we often commuted together. One snowy day, having forgotten my wallet, I couldn't buy an umbrella and ended up walking in the heavy snow. James called his wife, Sophia, saying, "Let's build a snowman. I'm with William, bring some gloves." That day, we had a blast, like kids, having snowball fights and building a beautiful snowman. Drenched as we were, James offered us to shower and stay over, but I felt too bad to accept. However, Sophia insisted, pulling me along. That evening turned into a beer party, and James, feeling sleepy, went to bed early. Sophia then handed me some fresh underwear for guests, telling me to have a nice shower and sleep over. After my shower, Sophia remarked, "You have a better physique than my husband. Whoever ends up being William's wife is going to be very lucky." Curiously, I asked Sophia what she found attractive in men, to which she replied that I was a good listener and had a great sense of humor. Making a snowman and diving into childhood memories seemed to wash away my fatigue, leading to a deep sleep. Waking up at dawn, I tidied up the bed and quietly returned home. Life at work was a continuous stress. James was overjoyed to share that Sophia was pregnant, though he was worried about her severe morning sickness. Remembering how my sister dealt with her morning sickness by eating biscuits, I bought a bunch and gave them to Sophia. Soon, I received a text from an unknown number. It was Sophia saying the biscuits had helped with her morning sickness, and she could now eat a bit more. Grateful, she had asked for my contact information. Having 3 sisters, I've picked up a lot of tips. "Please tell your niece or nephew they'll have a fun uncle to play with," I said, as we ended the call. James has always been excited about the arrival of his new baby, telling me I should find a good woman and start a family soon. We've remained close friends. He had to leave on a business trip abroad for 10 days and asked me to take good care of his pregnant wife. Over the weekend, while I was relaxing at home, Sophia called me. "Do you have time today? My brother gave me 2 tickets to this popular comedy movie. Want to join me?" I was pondering what to do over the weekend, so her call was a pleasant surprise. After watching the movie and having dinner, I drove her home. She mentioned feeling lonely and invited me to stay over for a while. I was delighted and gladly accepted. Sophia's baby bump looked so beautiful. She thanked me for the date, saying it was comforting to have someone to rely on, and asked me to keep it a secret from James. With a laugh, she confided that her body felt better, but her husband was being overly cautious, which was a bit frustrating. Understanding her hint, I spent the night with her. We met almost daily until James returned. Enjoying a different kind of companionship, Sophia was touched by my sensitivity towards a pregnant woman's feelings, even shedding tears of gratitude. I wondered if this was okay, but seeing Sophia happy made me happy too. After the baby was born, James had to travel to China for 6 months. Both families lived far away, leaving Sophia without much support for childcare, which overwhelmed her. James asked me to help if Sophia or the baby needed anything. I visited Sophia without her asking and ended up helping raise the child. Sophia, who was slim and pretty, gained some weight after childbirth. I reassured her, saying her fuller figure was more attractive. She looked beautiful as a mother. After putting the baby to sleep, we enjoyed our time together. Honestly, I wish James would return even later. Sophia seems to share the sentiment, but deep down, I know we should end this affair soon. Yet, leaving the lovely and beautiful Sophia for another woman seems too difficult.
My name is Sarah, and I am 34 years old. My husband, Tom, is 27. During our dating years, the age gap wasn't something we noticed much, but it became more apparent once we decided to marry. When I first met his parents, I was struck by their rural home in the Northeast and their deeply conservative views. They were initially very resistant to our relationship because of our age difference. I remember their disapproval vividly, with comments like, "They say an older wife is a rare find, but 7 years is quite a lot. Can Sarah even have children at her age? Won't her eggs be too old?" Such remarks could easily alienate most women. While the father-in-law was merely rude, the mother-in-law was outright hostile. She declared, "I refuse to accept this. Why does Tom need to marry someone 7 years older? It's too embarrassing to even discuss with the neighbors. He'll soon be back here to take over the family business, and with your city background, you're simply not suited to be our daughter-in-law." Tom and I had been together for 6 years, and I had devoted nearly all my late 20s to him. I was committed to marrying him, and after living together for a few years, I didn't have the energy to search for someone else. In my frustration, I pushed Tom into proposing, and he reluctantly agreed. Perhaps due to his youth or just his nature, he seemed to prefer keeping things as they were. When his parents opposed our engagement, he quickly shifted his stance, saying, "See, I told you it was too soon to get married. We can just register our marriage later." I responded firmly, "It's not too soon. The age difference will not change no matter how much time passes." Turning back to his parents with a polite smile, I said, "Yes, I am older than Tom, but that's something beyond our control. I promise to do my best to prove myself as a worthy daughter-in-law. I'm not perfect, but I hope you can accept me." Though they agreed with some reluctance, Tom's sister was adamantly opposed. At our first meeting, she bluntly declared, "Just so you know, don't refer to me as your sister-in-law. It's completely unacceptable for my brother to marry someone older than me." Looking back, I realize I was naive, yet with the confidence of someone who had navigated difficult clients in my work, I believed I could handle it. I now understand what they call rude bullying. I convinced myself that moving back to the countryside to live with the in-laws was not as bad as the horror stories I had read online. I should have called off the wedding at that point, but as they say, hindsight is 20/20. Now, a year later, I deeply regret getting married. Although our daily life and work routines didn't change much after we registered our marriage, one major shift was the frequent phone calls Tom started receiving from his mother. I could only guess what they were about, likely questioning when we would move back home and probably urging him to consider divorce. Whenever Tom received calls from his mother, he would retreat to another room or the bathroom, trying to shield me from overhearing. But with our small apartment, it was impossible not to catch snippets of the conversation. I often heard phrases like, "So, Sarah was saying," and couldn't help but listen in. It seemed they were accusing me of opposing the idea of moving back to Tom's hometown to live with his parents, but that wasn't true. When I asked Tom about moving back, he expressed reluctance, saying he didn't want to live somewhere without a nearby convenience store and where job opportunities were scarce. It seemed he was using me as a scapegoat for his own unwillingness to return home. It was frustrating to see Tom cast me as the villain to cover up his own hesitations. Just now, I overheard Tom in the next room saying, "So if I bring up divorce, I'd have to pay alimony, right?" His hesitation about divorce wasn't rooted in any lingering affection for me but rather in his aversion to paying alimony. Hearing his true feelings was disheartening. It might be time to seriously consider divorce. Although we don't have children, I began contemplating it privately without mentioning it to anyone. Shortly after, I received a call about Tom's sister's upcoming wedding, prompting us to take the express train back to his family's home for the ceremony. Despite Tom being considered the heir, our wedding had been a modest family dinner, while his sister's wedding was set to be a lavish event. I wanted to fulfill my social obligations and avoid any further fallout on our part despite the disparity. The wedding was scheduled for the middle of a 3-day weekend, so Tom and I arrived at his family's home the day before. Tom's sister's fiancé is from a neighboring city, and the wedding was set to take place at a venue there, with plans for the relatives to travel by chartered bus on the day of the event. As the family home became a hub for relatives, they began arriving in droves. The ceremony was set for just after 2 p.m. To avoid overcrowding the venue's dressing rooms, the venue staff, hairdressers, and dressers came to the house, and even Tom's parents were getting dressed up. Our own wedding had been more of a simple family dinner, so we wore slightly nicer everyday clothes. The contrast in treatment was stark and surprising. I had changed into the dress I had splurged on for the occasion, done my makeup, and was setting my hair when my father-in-law called out, "Hey, Sarah, could you serve some refreshments to the relatives?" With a smile, I began handing out refreshments, introducing myself with, "Nice to meet you. I'm Tom's wife. Please enjoy the refreshments," and trying to make my presence felt with the poise of a seasoned TV announcer. Despite my mother-in-law's suggestion to stay in Tom's room, I was eager to fulfill my role and make a good impression. I was determined to make a positive impression. Shortly after, the bus arrived to take us to the wedding venue. The relatives boarded with excitement, and as I prepared to join them, my mother-in-law called out, "Wait a minute, Sarah, I forgot the pearl necklace. Could you go get it?" "Really, in this formal dress?" I asked. She insisted, "It's in the drawer on top of the dresser in my room. It's a keepsake from my mother. Please hurry and bring it." "Understood, I'll look for it now," I replied. I hurried to my mother-in-law's room and began searching through the cluttered dresser drawer. The necklace wasn't immediately visible, and with everyone else already on the bus, I started to feel anxious. After about 5 minutes, I found a box that looked promising. I opened it quickly and dashed to the entrance, only to see that the bus had already left. The entire family, including Tom, had departed without me. "You've got to be kidding," I exclaimed, rubbing my eyes in disbelief. The bus was nowhere in sight. I panicked, realizing I'd left my cell phone in my bag, which had already been loaded onto the bus. I knew the venue's name but didn't have the phone number. Without my phone, I couldn't reach Tom, and without my wallet, I couldn't even get a taxi. What was I going to do? For a moment, I felt a wave of despair, but then I thought, do I even need to go to the wedding? My enthusiasm for the event had completely evaporated. It wasn't just my first time meeting the relatives. Surely my in-laws and Tom must have noticed I wasn't on the bus. Their departure without me seemed unnecessarily cruel. The idea of divorce crossed my mind, but simply ending the marriage seemed too easy. I wanted revenge. After some contemplation, I devised a plan. I stepped outside with a calm demeanor and a smile, preparing to execute my scheme. When the relatives, in-laws, and Tom returned from the wedding around 5 p.m., they were visibly drunk. By then, I had gathered all my belongings except for the bag that had gone with them. I found a taxi company's number in a phone book next to the in-laws' home phone and called, requesting a taxi to pick me up in 30 minutes. Everything was set. I greeted them at the bus with an innocent expression. Tom's face showed guilt when he saw me, but he didn't say a word. My in-laws ignored me, preoccupied with sending off the relatives. The relatives glanced my way but left in their cars. I wish Tom would at least offer an apology, but that's just how he was. With a forced smile, I said to Tom, "Welcome back." He looked visibly relieved and began making excuses. "I didn't realize you weren't on the bus." I felt bad, but the ceremony was starting, so I couldn't come back for you. I ignored his excuses and started searching through the luggage for my bag, silently conveying my disbelief. I turned to him and said, "Divorce? Is this some kind of joke?" Because it certainly feels like one. When Tom realized what I had said, he began to panic. "Who knows? I'm surprised you think such a petty lie would work. So what if you weren't noticed? Are you saying you forgot I existed until you saw me?" While both of his parents were awful, the real disappointment was Tom. He was left speechless, unable to defend himself. Then my father-in-law, after sending off the relatives, chimed in. "Come on, it was just a little forgetfulness on both sides. Tom's talking about divorce over something like this. City brides are really spineless." It seemed he was actually in favor of the divorce. My mother-in-law, upon hearing about it, smirked and said, "I knew it. A city bride just doesn't fit in. She was never right for our family." Her hypocrisy infuriated me. If that was how they felt, they should have just invited Tom to the wedding alone. Why make me travel all this way only to leave me behind? Anyone would be outraged by such treatment, whether they're a city bride or a country bride. When I shouted, my mother-in-law shouted back, "We never intended to invite you in the first place. There wasn't even a seat prepared for you. Tom brought you along by mistake, so we left you behind." I was shocked by her audacity. As I glared, Tom quickly looked away and shifted the blame to his mother, saying, "Well, Mom didn't explicitly say to come alone, so I assumed it meant as a couple." My mother-in-law's unreasonable anger continued. "And why did you go around serving tea and introducing yourself as the bride at the venue?" Relatives were asking why the wife didn't show up, not realizing Tom was even married. It made us look foolish. "That's your own fault, and it's absurd to say I shouldn't introduce myself," I retorted. It seemed my effort to introduce myself as Tom's wife to the relatives had made an impact. "So you never intended to acknowledge me and planned to divorce me eventually. That's why you kept our wedding a secret from the relatives and made it seem like just a dinner party." Neither my father-in-law nor my mother-in-law responded, but their silence confirmed my suspicions. It was clear to me that severing ties with this family was the right decision. "Fine, I'll grant your wish and divorce you. I'm better off without a hostile family and an unreliable husband." I boarded the taxi that had just arrived and took the last train back to my apartment. Unable to sleep that night, I impulsively searched for lawyers online and began packing my belongings. I kept myself busy until dawn. When I finally woke up late the next day, I found several missed calls from Tom and my in-laws. It seemed my revenge had made its mark. After being left behind, I came up with a plan for revenge, but I wanted to keep it within the bounds of safety and legality. I didn't want to just divorce and suffer in silence without making a statement. I recalled how concerned my mother-in-law was about the neighbors' opinions. There was a surplus of refreshments and snacks she had bought for the relatives, so I decided to use them. I bagged up the leftover treats and set out around the neighborhood, greeting everyone with a smile. "Hello, I'm Tom's wife," I announced and proceeded to share everything about how I had been treated and left behind on the wedding day. That evening, my mother-in-law and I had a loud argument outside. Naturally, the entire neighborhood heard, a perfect form of revenge for a family so worried about their public image. Afterward, Tom and I divorced without any major complications. The stories I shared were framed as casual conversations, so I wasn't sued for defamation. With the help of a lawyer, I was able to claim compensation for the abandonment and secure a satisfactory settlement. As for my sister-in-law, her marriage quickly unraveled. She had concealed her difficult personality to get married, but people rarely change. Her true nature emerged, and the marriage soured rapidly. Within 6 months, she had divorced and moved back to her parents' home. By then, the incident of my abandonment had become a notorious rumor. Eventually, the in-laws gained a reputation as a vile family that mistreated their daughter-in-law, leading to a much more subdued existence. Tom's prospects of finding a new bride in his hometown seemed bleak. I learned all this from a neighbor I had befriended and exchanged phone numbers with. It felt like perfect justice for me. The divorce felt like a new beginning. I regretted not recognizing the true nature of Tom and his family sooner, but now I had a clear perspective. Perhaps I should have withdrawn immediately when faced with their initial opposition, but I was young and naive. I don't want to disregard the happy moments we shared, so I see the past year as a valuable lesson for my future. I'm relieved to have resolved the situation and moved on.
The signs were prepared and positioned near the front entrance, having spent the majority of the last couple of days perfecting them. Now came the challenging part. Ascending the stairs into the master bedroom, I swiftly stripped the bed, maneuvered the mattress off the queen-sized frame, and half-lifted, half-slid it downstairs, through the hallway, out the front door, and onto the lawn adjacent to the street. Returning inside, I hurled the slats and bedclothes downstairs, following them outside and adding them to the pile beside the mattress. After another trip upstairs, I dismantled the side rails and swiftly transported them outside. Glancing at my watch, I noted it was 4:22. Time was of the essence. I needed to finish by 5. Reassembling the bed took until 4:35. Next up was the kitchen table, light enough for me to handle alone. I angled it sideways through the door and placed it beside the bed in the yard. The last item was the 6x8 throw rug in the living room. After rolling it up, I joined it with the other items in the yard, erected the signs, and proudly observed the time. 4:55. Just 10 minutes until my wife's return. Stepping into the middle of the street, I surveyed my handiwork. It was a sight to behold, almost bringing a tear to my eye. Our marriage bed, the kitchen table, and throw rug, 3 places I knew had been used by my wife and her lover repeatedly over the past 6 months. The signs, perfectly placed and out of reach, completed the scene. I approached each piece of furniture and read aloud the large sign in front of it. These items are yours for the taking, free. They are no longer wanted in this house. If you are able to stomach the stench of infidelity and broken vows, help yourself. The sign above the bed detailed my wife's infidelity, specifying her regular liaisons with her lover over the past 6 months. Above the kitchen table, another sign recounted their activities, typically just before she served me dinner. On the throw rug, a sign indicated their preference for that spot. Each sign was adorned with a 17 by 24-inch photo of the adulterous couple in the act. Behind the table, a 5th sign revealed the identity of my wife's lover, Greg Allen, her boss at Mitchell Price, and Allen Realty. Married with 3 children, he was unaware of his wife's actions, but not for long. The time was 4:57, just in time. She would be home any minute. As I turned to assess the gathering crowd of neighbors and the increasing number of halted cars, some onlookers phoned friends or the police. I nonchalantly acknowledged the gathering and retreated into the house, closing the door behind me. Precisely at 5 p.m., my wife's car rounded the corner. Observing the commotion near our house, she slowed down, her gaze fixed on the spectacle unfolding on our lawn. I imagined her focusing on the furniture and signs, particularly the large photos of her and Greg Allen engaged in their illicit activities, their expressions captured in moments of lust and pleasure. Even with her car window between us, amidst the crowd of 40 or 50 onlookers, I still heard her desperate cry. No. Oh God, no. Finally, her gaze shifted from the signs to the front window of our house, where she spotted me standing. We locked eyes. She appeared devastated, her complexion drained. Tears streamed down her cheeks. It seemed as if she was questioning me, mirroring my own bewilderment. I observed her for a moment before turning away, drawing the curtain shut behind me. Perhaps now is the time to recount how my wife, Sherry, and I ended up in this tragic situation. My name is Jack Meyer. I met Sherry during our junior year of college, introduced by a mutual friend. Instantly, I was captivated. Sherry wasn't conventionally beautiful, but she possessed an irresistible charm. Standing at 5'2" with striking blue eyes and shoulder-length blonde hair, she had a petite, yet perfectly proportioned figure that enchanted me. From that moment, I was smitten, never doubting my ability to win her heart. Sherry and I began dating, quickly becoming inseparable. Within a month, we shared our first closeness moment, an experience unlike any other. I was consumed by my love for Sherry, unable to get enough of her. Though we were not maidens, our passion for each other was all-consuming. Every moment together was blissful, every touch electric. Our love deepened over the years. After graduating, we married and settled into our first home, a condo in Van Nuys. Sherry pursued a career in real estate while I found work in electronic manufacturing. We built a life together that I believed to be perfect. For the next 13 years, we shared an idyllic existence. First in our condo and later in our dream home as our finances improved. We welcomed our children, Shelby, now 8, and Ryan, now 6, whom we adored beyond measure. Our family was our world. So, what went wrong? I wish I had the answers. I wish I had noticed the subtle signs indicating something was amiss. But I was oblivious, living in a bubble of love and trust. It took an unexpected event, our daughter Shelby falling ill at school, to uncover the truth. It was a Thursday when I received the call from the school nurse just before noon, informing me of Shelby's illness. In the midst of a staff meeting, I asked the nurse to contact my wife. Despite attempts to reach her at her office and on her cell, she was unreachable. So, the nurse called me. Recognizing the urgency of fetching my daughter, I apologized to my staff and hurried to Shelby's school to retrieve her. Upon reaching home, upon opening the garage, I was startled by an unfamiliar car parked in my spot beside my wife's. Instantly, a lump formed in my throat, and my stomach churned. No, it couldn't be, I reassured myself. My wife, the woman I cherished above all else, couldn't possibly be having an affair. But why was there a strange car in the garage with the door closed? Something was amiss, and I needed answers. I couldn't expose my daughter to this uncertainty. I instructed Shelby to stay in the car for a moment, explaining that the exterminator was spraying for bugs, and the fumes could make her feel worse. It was the first time I had ever lied to her. Shelby complained about being tired and wanting to go inside, but I reassured her that I would check first before coming to get her. Later, Shelby asked me what was going on, and I reassured her that everything was fine, attributing my discomfort to the odor in the house. I left Shelby with her grandmother, promising to return for her in a couple of hours. I didn't disclose what I had witnessed, simply asking my mom to care for Shelby until I returned from work. Though tempted to return home and confront the cheating duo, I realized I needed more than a mere confrontation. I craved revenge. As I drove back to my office, I began devising plans that would bring ruin upon my wife and her boss indefinitely. The electronics firm where I worked had multiple divisions. As a senior engineer in the medical equipment division, we shared a large complex with another division specializing in commercial security equipment. Upon reaching my office, I instructed my secretary to ensure I wasn't disturbed for the rest of the afternoon, then called my counterpart in the security division. Dan Taylor, a stellar engineer and longtime friend, agreed to meet promptly. He mentioned he'd already be coming my way to drop off some blueprints for copying. I informed my secretary that Dan could enter my office as soon as he arrived. True to his word, Dan knocked on my door just 20 minutes later. I requested him to come in and close the door, noting that I needed his help. Dan remarked that I looked like I had seen a ghost, to which I responded by recounting the shocking discovery I had made earlier. I explained to Dan that I had caught my wife and her boss having an affair in our house, specifically in our bedroom. Despite the disbelief, I assured him it was true, detailing how I found them together when I came home to pick up my daughter from school. I refrained from confronting them at the moment, prioritizing my daughter's well-being by having her wait in the car while I quietly left and took her to my mom's house. Dan expressed his sympathy and asked about my plan moving forward. I admitted uncertainty, but emphasized the need for evidence, mentioning my intention to gather audio and video recordings of their encounters. I sought Dan's assistance in acquiring security cameras and microphones to discreetly place around the house. Dan questioned the certainty of there being a next time, suggesting that the incident might have been isolated. However, I dismissed this possibility, citing conversations between my wife and her boss about regular rendezvous over the past 6 months. I explained my reasoning, noting the lack of alternative locations and the convenience of my empty house during work hours. After a few more minutes of discussion, we delved into the details. Dan mentioned having access to a new beta line of wireless miniature cameras and microphones compatible with my laptop or home computer. Additionally, he had a small voice-activated recorder I could discreetly place under Sherry's car seat to capture any conversations she might have while driving. It would only record her side of the conversation, but it was better than nothing. I expressed gratitude and informed him I'd collect everything from his office the following day. Returning home that evening proved to be the most challenging task I'd ever faced. I wasn't sure if I could face my wife and pretend nothing had happened. I decided the best course of action was to make Sherry believe I wasn't feeling well, which was true. I retrieved Shelby from my mom's, and upon arriving home, Sherry was preparing dinner in the kitchen. Upon seeing Shelby with me, she grew frantic. I questioned Sherry about her whereabouts and why she hadn't informed me about Shelby's illness, mentioning that I received a message from the school nurse on the answering machine. Sherry explained that she must have accidentally turned off her phone while showing houses and had been busy all day. I couldn't help but think cynically that she was likely preoccupied with her affair with her boss instead of attending to our daughter. Despite this, Sherry hugged Shelby and apologized before helping her to bed. I acknowledged that despite her flaws, my wife did love our kids, and it seemed I was the obstacle to her happiness. Sherry then returned to the kitchen to prepare soup for Shelby and finish dinner for the rest of us. Feeling unwell myself, I informed Sherry that I would sleep in the guest room that night, just in case I was contagious. She noted that I felt clammy and looked pale. Silently, I acknowledged the irony of feeling unwell after discovering my wife's affair. Without responding, I headed upstairs, initially dreading entering the master suite, but needing my grooming supplies, toothbrush, and work attire for the next day, so I forced myself into the room. A window was open, and the scent of lovemaking had dissipated. The bed was neatly made. She must have changed the sheets. It pained me to look at it. All I could envision was her boss having lovemaking with her, whispering sweet nothings about belonging to him alone forever. Anger surged within me, but I suppressed it. I needed to remain composed until I could unleash havoc upon them both, and I would. That much was certain. I gathered my necessities and retreated to the guest bedroom, shutting the door behind me. I stripped down to my underwear and slipped into bed. My body felt rigid. I wanted to weep, but I stifled the urge. I had a mission to accomplish, and I couldn't allow emotions to interfere. For hours I lay in the darkness, sleep evading me. After tending to the kids and putting them to bed, my wife entered the room. I pretended to be asleep. She pressed her palm against my forehead before exiting the room, shutting the door behind her. Sherry typically handled taking the kids to school, so I rose early, showered, and left the house before her awakening. It probably struck her as odd, but I could simply attribute it to needing to compensate for lost time from yesterday when I felt unwell. Frankly, I didn't care much about her opinion at this point. I just wanted to be free. Free from what? Until yesterday, I believed it was a blissful marriage founded on lifelong loyalty, honesty, and commitment. How painfully mistaken I was. Arriving at work before the rest of the staff, I brewed a pot of coffee and began outlining my strategies. I realized I needed to cancel our shared credit cards, transfer half of our joint accounts to a separate bank under my sole name, alter my will, life insurance, and 401k beneficiaries, removing Sherry and naming only Shelby and Ryan. It felt like such a trivial effort to dissolve the last 13 years of my life. It should have been more challenging. Deep down, I suspected it would become harder at some point. I also understood the necessity of securing a competent divorce attorney to protect myself from Sherry's potential exploitation. Being in a no-fault divorce state, infidelity wouldn't significantly affect the financial settlement, but it might aid in retaining custody of my children. Sherry had demonstrated my insignificance in her life, yet she was a devoted mother, and I didn't want to deprive her of her children. I merely sought joint custody to ensure I remained a vital presence in their lives. I fought to suppress thoughts of our love life and the humiliation of overhearing my wife praise her lover's superiority to me in every aspect. If I allowed myself to dwell on it now, I'd begin to doubt myself, which I couldn't afford at the moment. That reckoning would come later, and when it did, it would likely devastate me. With my to-do list complete, I phoned Dan's office. He assured me everything would be ready by noon and offered to assist me in installing and operating the equipment. As I attempted to focus on clearing paperwork from my desk, I noticed Sherry's call on my cell phone. Despite her typically affectionate tone, her voice only fueled my anger this time. Sherry expressed concern about my well-being, mentioning that she hadn't been able to check on me before I left that morning. I responded vaguely, stating that I needed to clear my head. She suggested an idea to make me feel better that evening, but internally, I couldn't help but feel resentful and deceived by her lies. However, I kept my response neutral, indicating that we would see. Sherry commented on my apparent lack of interest, to which I replied that I was preoccupied, rather than uninterested. We agreed to meet at home by 6, and she reassured me that she would be in the office all day if I needed to reach her. I phoned Dan, who confirmed everything was prepared, instructing me to meet him at the loading dock entrance. We loaded all the equipment into Dan's van, and with both of us working on the installation, we had it all set up and tested by 3:30. Then, we installed the software on my home office PC and configured a secure folder to collect and store everything captured by the cameras and microphones. We strategically placed bugs in the living room, kitchen, guest bedroom, and, notably, the master suite, ensuring the latter had 4 cameras to capture nearly every activity. As an additional measure, we installed a camera and microphone in the master bathroom, just in case the couple decided to shower together after their encounter. The system was motion-activated, with the cameras triggering the microphones. I was prepared. That night was exceptionally challenging for me. After dinner, and once the kids were asleep, I followed my wife to our bedroom. I turned away from her and pretended to fall asleep. Sherry noticed the change in our usual routine and asked if everything was all right. I expressed some insecurities about whether I was enough for her, to which she reassured me that I was more than enough and that she couldn't bear anything happening to me. She emphasized that I was her perfect lover. Despite her reassurances, I remained distant and brushed off her concern, stating that nothing was bothering me. I feigned exhaustion, closed my eyes, and attempted to sleep. Later, I heard Sherry softly crying. I felt no sympathy for her, but I pondered whether her tears stemmed from shame for her actions or from feeling mistreated by me again. I rose before her and seized the chance to place the voice recorder beneath the seat of her car. I also reviewed the video and audio recordings from the installed equipment, confirming that everything from the previous night was captured clearly, even in the dim nighttime conditions of our bedroom. Initially, Sherry was a bit curt, mentioning that I had said some hurtful things the night before. Then, she gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, and her demeanor shifted to cheerful. Perhaps it was due to her afternoon plans with her boss. I poured her a cup of coffee and informed her that I'd be locked in my office all day. She mentioned having to show several homes that afternoon and expressed confidence in making a significant sale, but assured she'd be able to pick up Shelby and Ryan after school. With a peck on her cheek, I headed towards the garage door. Sherry reminded me that I had forgotten to say, "I love you." She emphasized how important it was for her to hear those words from me every morning. I apologized, explaining that there was a lot on my mind, but Sherry insisted that it was important for her to hear those words. I promised not to forget in the future, and with that, I left. Yeah, I'll tell some girl how much I love her if and when I ever find another girl I can trust enough to fall in love with. The intel Sherry provided about showing homes all afternoon led me to think she'd probably be with her true love. I hoped so. I was tired of games and wanted this ordeal done. I spent the morning working in my office but kept glancing at my watch. Finally, at noon, I told my secretary I'd be gone for a few hours and put my plan in motion. I borrowed a company van and parked across from my house, waiting to see what happened. It wasn't until nearly 1 o'clock that I saw Sherry's car arrive, open the garage door, and park in her usual spot. When she entered the house without closing the garage, I figured she was either leaving again or expecting someone. 10 minutes later, I realized she was expecting someone as the same car from the day I caught them pulled into the garage, taking my place, just as he had taken my place in my wife's life. I saw him get out of the car and the garage door closed. I had to give it to them. They had the nerve to meet in my house, in my bed, to carry out their affair. It just proved they thought they wouldn't get caught or didn't care. Well, they'd soon find out they were wrong. They were caught. And I'd make sure they both cared with this final proof of my wife's infidelity. And knowing I'd soon have all the visual proof I needed of their affair, I finally let the tears fall. For 13 years, I was convinced my loving wife would never cheat on me, just as I'd never cheat on her. With the tears came doubts. Was he a better lover? Maybe better looking, but neither of us was exceptional. Why risk our marriages? I desperately wanted to confront them. But why? What would it achieve? I'd catch them, but I'd already done that once. Would I feel better by confronting her lover? Yes, but I'd likely go to jail. By this time, neither of them were worth it. My only worry was how this would affect my kids and his, as I was prepared to confront him, just as he had confronted me. By 2:30, they must have finished, as the garage door opened and he left 15 minutes later. My wife did the same, closing the garage door behind her. I knew she'd return home with the kids by 3:30, so I quickly parked in the garage and made my way to my home office. I didn't want to review all the footage, just ensure the evidence was safely on my hard drive. After 10 minutes, I'd had my fill. It wasn't an exact replay of their previous encounter, but it was explicit. They began by having lovemaking on the kitchen table where I eat. They joked about how many times they wondered if I'd ever realize I was dining where he had been closeness with her so often. Then, they moved to our bedroom, though not before her lover suggested using my daughter's room for a change of scenery. My wife adamantly refused, stating it was off limits to involve their kids' rooms. At least she seemed to have some principles, just not concerning me. In the bedroom, they resumed their activities. I noticed neither of them expressed love, but my wife continued to praise her boss as the best lover she'd ever had. However, I couldn't comprehend why they then moved to the throw rug by the living room fireplace, where they engaged once more when finished. I found it strange that she didn't bother changing the sheets, assuming she would do so when she returned with the kids at 3:30. This gave her plenty of time to air out the room and remove any evidence. Since I rarely arrived home before 6 and had secured the evidence I needed on my hard drive, I shut down the system and left the house without bothering to check the assumed mess on our marriage bed. I'd seen enough, and although my heart was hardened against my wife, I still felt sick inside, a sickness soon replaced by burning anger and hatred. I may have even smiled, knowing the hell I was about to unleash on their cheating heads. Back at work, I briefed Dan on everything. Like me, he couldn't comprehend how a supposedly loving wife like Sherry could do what was now clear. Not only did she break our sacred vows, but she also went out of her way to humiliate me to her lover, always affirming his superiority. All these thoughts plunged my soul into a deep abyss of pain and despair, from which I knew I had to emerge to complete my task of destroying them both. I needed to find a good divorce lawyer, and Dan suggested contacting the law firm the company used for recommendations. I spoke to a corporate lawyer there who gave me 3 names of divorce lawyers known for protecting husbands' rights. The first one was retiring and not taking new clients, but the second one agreed to meet me the next afternoon at 3. With that settled, I resolved to handle canceling credit cards, changing beneficiaries, and transferring funds the next morning. When I returned home that night, Sherry was in the kitchen preparing dinner while the kids did their homework in their rooms. She wore a yellow sundress and looked beautiful. For a moment, I thought my heart would break all over again. She was smiling and seemed so happy. I assumed it was her usual post-afternoon delight mood. She greeted me and asked about my day, mentioning that hers was great due to making a sale. I responded with mild interest, aware of the reason behind her happiness. I asked if anything else notable happened that day, or if she met any interesting people, to which she denied, stating that she was focused on work to return home to her family. Despite her reassurance, I couldn't shake the suspicion of her affair as I headed upstairs to change clothes. While changing, I noticed the sheets had been replaced and the room aired out. Upon returning to the kitchen, I mentioned the water on the shower floor and asked if she had showered that afternoon. She appeared startled and denied it, suggesting a possible clogged drain. I speculated about the possibility of someone sneaking into the house for a rendezvous and showering afterward, which seemed to unsettle her. She attempted to brush it off with humor. As dinner progressed, conversation was minimal. I surprised Sherry by switching seats with her, prompting her to question the change. I explained it as a desire for a change of scenery. She appeared puzzled and ate little, mainly moving food around on her plate. During dinner, the kids talked about their day, but Sherry and I mostly listened, making occasional comments. After we all helped clean the dishes, I returned to my office to work on my project. I reviewed footage from that day and selected suitable stills to turn into photographs, which I downloaded to a photo file for printing. Next, I carefully crafted wording for the signs I would create with the photographs. All that remained was to visit my lawyer to initiate the divorce, get my finances in order, and await the next visit from my wife and her lover. When I finally went to bed that night, Sherry was already asleep, or at least pretending to be. I was fairly certain my actions that evening had given her something to ponder. Not that it mattered. There was nothing she could say or do to change my mind about divorcing her for her infidelity, and there was a small silver lining in the fact that I believe I'd managed to make her at least somewhat uneasy. Today was Tuesday, and she had mentioned making another sale on Thursday, so I took that as a signal that she and her lover would be meeting on that day. That would also mark the day I brought them down. The following morning, I rose early again, showered, and left before Sherry woke up. I had a lot to accomplish and wanted to allocate as much time as possible to get it done. My lawyer appointment wasn't until 3, so I had plenty of time to handle all the financial matters. First, I visited HR, where I changed the beneficiary on my life insurance and 401k from Sherry to Shelby and Ryan. I received some odd looks from the woman assisting me, but I didn't feel obligated to explain my actions to her or anyone else. Next, I canceled all our joint credit cards and obtained new ones in my name alone. Then, I proceeded to the bank, where I transferred half of the funds from our joint checking and savings accounts to another bank in my name. I knew I needed to address our home, but I presumed the courts would allow Sherry to stay there with the kids, so I postponed action on that front until I consulted with my lawyer. At 3, I met with my lawyer, finding him to be agreeable enough. He cautioned me that since we were in a no-fault state, Sherry would likely get custody of Shelby and Ryan, and I'd lose the house and half of everything else to my wife, even with proof of her infidelity. I instructed him on how I wanted the petition written, and when he expressed doubt about my chances of taking nearly everything from her, I reassured him. I was confident I could persuade her to agree to whatever I wanted. He wasn't pleased, but he complied with my demands, assuring me he would have everything prepared for her to be served Friday morning. I also had him draft papers to file against her boss and his company for intentionally wrecking my marriage. Those documents would also be ready by Friday morning. I was prepared. When I returned home that evening, I kept my demeanor cool towards Sherry. Frankly, I had reached my limit and just wanted the whole ordeal to end so I could move on with my life. I knew there was still a lot of pain and heartache ahead, but I acknowledged there was no turning back. Besides, I'd finally be sharing the anguish and misery with my unfaithful wife and her despicable lover. After a subdued dinner with minimal conversation, I retired to my study, printed the photos of the lovers I intended to use, and crafted the signs without interruption. I also found time to compose a letter to Greg Allen's wife, enclosing prints of the large photos I planned to use on the posters, informing her that I had plenty of video evidence to provide her in case she decided to divorce her husband, as I was divorcing mine. Shortly after 11, I went to our bedroom to ensure Sherry was asleep, then made my way to her car, retrieved the voice-activated recorder from beneath her seat, rewound it, and listened to its contents. I overheard one side of a conversation that sounded like it was with Greg. The caller expressed gratitude for their time together that afternoon and mentioned missing Greg after they were together. They discussed the idea of spending a whole week together and fabricated a story about a real estate convention they must attend. The caller mentioned having to give Jack occasional attention to keep him happy, but expressed a desire to be exclusively with Greg. They confirmed plans for Thursday afternoon and ended the call. I was taken aback to discover that her words didn't sting as much as they had in the past. Perhaps there was still hope for me after all. Little did she realize how soon she would belong solely to him forever, and the knowledge that I was just one day away from dismantling their comfortable lives filled me with a sense of satisfaction. Revenge, I was realizing, wielded formidable power. I swapped out the tape with a fresh one and returned the recorder under her seat, hoping it would capture evidence of her anguish the next day when her world crumbled. I hardly slept a wink that night, not because I was heartbroken. I had surpassed that. No, my sleeplessness stemmed from the anticipation of everything I hoped would unfold the following day. For the last time, I rose from bed. While Sherry continued to slumber, I stood gazing at the woman who had once been my love, the mother of my children, the woman I had imagined spending the rest of my days with. Tears welled in my eyes as I realized I had shared my bed with her for the final time. Never again would our bodies entwine in passion. Never again would we cuddle or discuss our future. Our future was non-existent, and as I turned away from her and departed, I pondered whether she comprehended the toll she was about to pay for betraying me. She likely didn't, but she would soon learn. After showering, I left the house, stopped for breakfast at a diner, then briefly swung by work to inform my secretary of my absence for the day. I phoned Dan and briefed him on the impending events. He wished me luck, cautioned me to be cautious, and requested that I keep him updated on the proceedings. I made a brief visit to my lawyer's office to ensure all was in order for serving my wife and Greg Allen the following day. Following that, I called my wife to arrange picking up the kids from school. My mother had expressed a desire to have them for the long weekend, since they had no school on Friday. Thus, I planned to swing by the house around 3:45 to gather some belongings and transport the kids directly to Mom's. She enthusiastically approved, even suggesting we spend Saturday in bed together in her most seductive tone. I agreed nonchalantly before ending the call. I had reached a point where I couldn't tolerate her deceit any longer. I took my time returning home. By 12:30, I was parked nearby, awaiting the imminent events. My car was mostly concealed from view, but I had a clear line of sight to any vehicle entering my driveway. I didn't need to witness the garage door's movements. My wife and her lover were nothing if not predictable, and I was familiar with their routine. At 12:50, Sherry's car rolled into the driveway, followed 5 minutes later by Greg Allen's. The trap was set, and I was poised to ensnare them. I should have felt anguish knowing my wife and her boss were engaging in pleasure in our marital bed while I waited around the corner for them to finish. Yet, she had lost her ability to inflict pain upon me. It was astonishing how composed I felt as I envisioned the activities I knew they were engaging in together. It was almost reminiscent of recalling a low-budget adult film, lacking in substance but with a satisfying conclusion around 10 minutes to 3. I observed Alan's car reverse out of the driveway and depart. 10 minutes later, Sherry followed suit. Sweet. As she drove off, I observed her applying fresh lipstick. Once they were out of sight, I pulled into my garage and shut the door. With limited time on my hands, I headed to my office and reviewed the footage from that afternoon's encounter. Everything was captured, including the hurtful insults about his superiority in bed compared to me. However, this time, their words didn't affect me. After ensuring the footage was securely stored on my hard drive, I spent the next 10 minutes carrying my handcrafted signs, adorned with their photographs, upstairs and positioning them near the front door for easy access. Then, I packed essentials like a toothbrush and clothes for Shelby and Ryan into my car. The only remorse I felt about my impending actions was for the pain I was about to inflict on my beloved children. Yet, I found solace in knowing I hadn't caused the pain of their parents' separation. That responsibility rested solely on their mother's shoulders. She chose to engage in a prolonged affair, ultimately tearing our family apart. At 3:15, I drove to their school and was waiting when the final bell rang to pick them up. I informed them they'd spend the weekend with Grandma, which thrilled them given her penchant for spoiling them. 45 minutes later, I dropped them off and returned home, ready to set my plan in motion. And thus, we come full circle to where we began. Bed, table, and rug displayed on the lawn adorned with signs, watched by neighbors, awaiting Sherry's return to the dreadful truth that I held all the knowledge. That night, I expected to hear from Sherry, but I didn't. There was a late call from her cell phone, but when I answered, silence greeted me. An hour after Sherry departed, the police paid me a visit. While understanding, they insisted I remove the signs and photographs to avoid disturbing the peace and public indecency charges. I complied. They served their purpose, seen by my wife, and from the look on her face before I turned away, I knew her life had begun its descent into chaos. That evening I drowned my sorrows in a substantial amount of Maker's Mark and drifted into an alcoholic stupor. Friday morning greeted me with a monstrous hangover, yet despite it, I felt empowered. Though saddened and alone, I found strength in knowing I had subdued my anger long enough to exact revenge on my unfaithful wife and her lover. By noon, I glimpsed out the front window to find the rug, kitchen table, and bed gone, leaving only the mattress and stained sheets behind. I'd dispose of those later. The morning passed uneventfully, but by 3 p.m, chaos erupted. I was certain that Greg Adams' wife had received the letter and photographs that morning, and my lawyer had informed me that both Sherry and Greg Adams, along with his partners, had been served at their workplaces. He recounted how Sherry collapsed in tears upon being served, while Greg Adams disregarded her, unleashing threats against me. His partners retreated behind closed doors for 15 minutes before emerging to present Sherry with her final check and informing Greg that his partnership was terminated. When he informed them of his refusal to sell to them, they cited their corporate bylaws morality clause regarding love fraternization with staff members. This provision empowered them to sever all ties with him and his mistress. Concurrently, the receptionist at the front desk relayed that his wife was on the phone, urgently requesting to speak with him. She had received a letter and photos I had sent, informing him not to return home and notifying him of her intent to file for divorce the following day. Later, I was informed by one of the agency employees' husbands that after Adams was escorted out of the building, everyone turned their backs on my soon-to-be ex-wife. She remained on the floor for about 30 minutes, crying inconsolably. Eventually, she gathered herself enough to leave, though no one knew her whereabouts. The next day, Sherry finally called me, sounding distraught. She inquired about the children and whether they knew about the situation. I assured her they were safe at my mother's and wouldn't hear the details from me. She thanked me for my discretion and asked to retrieve some belongings, to which I agreed, offering to leave for a few hours. She requested to stay and talk, but I declined, leading to more tears from her. She pleaded for my understanding, expressing remorse and claiming she never intended to hurt me. I laughed at her apology, questioning how she could claim innocence when she had expressed love and longing for her lover, comparing him favorably to me. I accused her of betraying me with her words to him, saying I had recordings of her confessing these feelings. Despite her denial, I insisted that her words were recorded, and nothing she said could change how I felt about her. She professed her love for me, claiming she had always loved only me, and didn't understand why she said those things to Greg. She explained that she had done it to boost his ego because he complained about his wife. I questioned her explanation, pointing out that she had torn me down to him and had lovemaking with him for 6 months. She insisted she never meant to hurt me and didn't mean any of it. When I pressed her for an explanation, she admitted that it felt dirty with Greg and that she felt she should be dirty with him, keeping it separate from what she had with me, which she described as loving and clean. I expressed disbelief at her actions and called her sick, admitting my own foolishness for not seeing it sooner. She begged for a chance to make it right, insisting that she loved only me and belonged to me. She pleaded for forgiveness and offered to come to me immediately, begging me not to leave her. I informed Sherry that I no longer loved her and that she was the one who left me. I condemned her actions with Greg over the past 6 months, stating that her behavior proved she didn't love me. I expressed disgust towards her and eagerly awaited her departure from my life. I rejected any possibility of reconciliation, expressing my disdain for her after what she had done with Greg. I emphasized that any future interaction would only be for the sake of our children, whom she had also damaged. I explained that while I wanted to spare our children pain, I had no intention of sparing her any consequences for her actions. I wanted her to feel the same pain she had caused me and Greg's wife. When she questioned why I told Greg's wife about their affair, I retorted that what she and Greg did was unfair to me and our children. I justified informing Greg's wife by highlighting the destruction of my family, the betrayal of our marital vows, and the need for Greg's wife to know the truth. Sherry expressed her desire to fight for our marriage, stating that she didn't want a divorce. I responded by saying there was nothing left to fight for and that I would rather die than remain married to her. I accused her of being delusional and out of her mind. She urged me to read the divorce petition she served me with, claiming that if I agreed to joint custody for our children, I could stay in the house and receive half of our assets. However, she threatened to share the videos of her affair if I didn't agree to her terms. When I doubted her willingness to follow through with the threat, she insisted that she could and would do it out of hatred towards me. She pleaded with me to sign the divorce papers, but I remained firm in my decision. In the end, she begged me to sign the papers, but I refused, insisting that she should sign them instead. After hanging up on her, Sherry signed the divorce papers, and the divorce was finalized in 6 months. She now lives with Shelby and Ryan in our former home, while I reside in a nearby condo. Despite the divorce, we remained in the same school district to minimize disruption for the kids, although they still felt the pain of the breakup. Shelby disclosed that their mother acknowledged her mistake, accepting that our marriage couldn't overcome it. However, we reassured the kids that we would always be there for them. As for what Sherry told her parents and sister about the breakup, I'm uncertain, but they still communicate with me, indicating she likely didn't place blame solely on me. My mother perceived the divorce as something neither Sherry nor I could move past. I had the chance to retrieve the audio recorder from Sherry's car one last time, capturing a memorable conversation. She called Greg and thanked him for their time together, expressing concern about my suspicions and suggesting they pause their affair temporarily. Upon arriving home, she discovered signs and photographs revealing my knowledge of her infidelity, leading to her panic and realization of the consequences. She called Greg in distress, informing him that I knew everything about their affair, and broke down into tears. It's been over a year since we endured those trying times, and gradually, I'm beginning to piece things back together. I still steer clear of dating, and will likely continue to do so for a while. The idea of reliving what I've just gone through makes me wary of diving into another serious relationship. Shelby mentioned that her mom went on one date but returned home in tears, and as far as she knows, hasn't dated since. Sherry found work as a receptionist in a retirement village and has put her real estate career on hold, at least for now. I've never found out if she keeps in touch with Greg Allen, and frankly, I don't care. Greg Allen and his wife divorced, and he's been struggling to find employment. Even though I didn't share the videos of their closeness encounters with anyone, Sherry knew I wasn't sympathetic towards Greg. It seems many businesses are wary of hiring someone with a reputation for seducing married women and causing marriages to dissolve. Although I blurred Sherry's face in the videos, I retained all the audio. I recently heard that Greg's ex-wife is dating a kind police officer, and it appears to be serious. Good for her. Speaking of Greg's former employer, to avoid negative publicity, they offered me a generous settlement to prevent a lawsuit. I accepted. As far as I'm concerned, that chapter is closed for now. My focus is solely on my children and their future. Perhaps one day, my own future will take precedence as well.
I was packing for our annual fishing trip, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. This trip, a long-standing tradition with my closest friends, felt different this year. Normally, it was a group affair with us and our wives, a testament to our inseparable bond since grade school. However, changes were afoot. Kenny had to miss the initial part of the trip due to a business obligation, causing his wife Pam to also delay her participation. Then, Don had to cut his trip short for a meeting, leading his wife to stay behind. Once Becky learned that she'd be the only wife on the trip from the start, She opted not to join either. The alteration in plans was a letdown. Our trips were known for strengthening our friendships and spicing up our marriages, filled with laughter and memorable moments. Now it seemed like a shadow of its usual self. Despite my excitement for the trip, I couldn't help but feel a sense of loss, particularly missing the intimate moments with Becky. Yet, the week leading up to the trip, Becky and I shared a passionate connection, a fervor that was both exhausting and deeply cherished. It was a bittersweet prelude to an altered tradition. For most of the year, our intimate life had settled into a routine that could be described as more functional than exciting, happening maybe twice a week. This was enough to meet our basic needs, but lacked the fiery passion we had in the early days of our marriage. Back then, our desire for each other was relentless, and we took advantage of every moment and place we could find for intimacy. However, about 5 years ago, this intensity began to wane, and our frequent encounters became less frequent, dwindling to just a few times a week. Becky seemed more and more reluctant, leading to frustration and occasional arguments on my part. Over time, though, I came to terms with this shift in our relationship, learning to handle my disappointment on my own. This context was on my mind that Thursday evening as I sat in the den, trying to relax with a beer after finishing my packing. Becky was upstairs, putting the kids to bed, a routine that had become as much a part of our lives as our changed intimate dynamics. After a while, I heard her footsteps as she came back down and went into the kitchen. She then joined me in the den, a glass of wine in her hand, and a look of concern on her face. "Honey," she began, her voice laced with seriousness, "we need to have an important talk. I understand this might upset you, but please hear me out before responding. I promise to address any questions you have afterward. I should have brought this up months ago, but I needed to gather some information first." Her tone was earnest, hinting at the gravity of what she was about to share. I'm not sure why, but I felt a surge of fear. Becky's demeanor was apologetic and fearful, yet her resolve was unmistakable. It was clear she was about to discuss something serious. After taking a deep breath and another large sip of her wine, she continued, "I know our intimate life hasn't been satisfying for you in the past few years, honey. Frankly, I haven't found much joy in our moments together either. Davy, I love you deeply, but, well, honey, you no longer stir the same excitement in me that you once did. And David, I want to remain your wife. You're an excellent father, a fantastic provider, and a true friend, but I'm seeking more than what you can offer me physically." I could feel anger starting to boil inside me. What was she implying? I thought she had grown distant, but what was the significance of the past week? I was certain I had made a significant impact. Just as I was about to interject, Becky raised her hand. "David, you promised to let me finish speaking before you responded." I bit down hard, forcing myself to lean back into my chair, trying to temper my rising frustration as she went on. "David, there's someone I've known for a while who captivates me in a way I cannot ignore. It's not just about Zex. No, it's about making love in a way that I feel we can't anymore. I didn't want to go behind your back. I will still be here for you, but I need to be honest about my needs. Being with him makes me feel alive, reminiscent of how we felt at the beginning of our marriage. It's something I can't seem to get enough of." I jumped from my chair and began screaming at her. "You cheating witch! How could you—" Becky stood and jumped in front of me. She pushed me back and I fell into my chair. She stood over me and continued, "Shut up! I told you that you wouldn't like what I had to say, but you promised to listen to me before you said anything. Now shut up and listen." I found myself rooted to the spot, stunned, as Becky loomed over me, her gaze fierce with a determination I had never seen before. She went on, her words like a cold, unwelcome breeze. "I've spoken with Don about the divorce laws here, and you need to understand the reality. Divorcing me won't be in your favor. You'd end up losing significantly. I'd be entitled to a large portion of your income for alimony and child support. The courts would likely grant me custody of the kids and the house to ensure their stability. Half of our savings and your retirement fund would also be mine. You'd be left with barely enough to live on, let alone maintain the lifestyle you're accustomed to. It would mean our children growing up in a broken home, dealing with all the associated difficulties. For your sake and for the kids, you need to come to terms with my decision. Despite everything, I still hold love and respect for you." Our life won't change much on the surface. I'm not cutting you off entirely. It's just that I'll be absent now and then, maybe even taking trips with him for the time we need together." As her words sank in, a mix of disbelief and anger welled up inside me. Watching Becky return to her seat, a silence fell over the room, heavy and tense. After a moment, I managed to find my voice, a mix of hurt and outrage barely contained. "I can't believe this. How could you do this? After everything, to come to me with such a betrayal. How long has this been going on? Who is he?" Becky looked at me with some anger and said, "Using mean words won't solve anything, honey. I hope you can move past your feelings and we can continue living as we have for the past few years. I won't tell you how long this has been going on or when or where it happens, and I definitely won't tell you who I'm intimate with. It's none of your business, and if I catch you snooping around, I'll have to take actions you won't like. I've been seeing someone else and I'm done hiding it. I need to be honest because the sneaking around is too much. I want to be upfront about when I go out so you can take care of the kids, but I won't tell you who he is to avoid trouble. If you try to do something bad to him or me, it won't end well, especially for our kids who need you. Just know, if you try to hurt us, there will be consequences." Once again, I sat there shocked at how calmly Becky laid out her information. She seemed so sure, so prepared. It was clear she had been planning this moment for a while. Despite my thoughts and comments, she had an answer for everything. I said, "I should probably call the guys and let them know I won't be going on this trip. We need to sort some things out and I have a lot on my plate." I reached for my phone, but Becky grabbed my hand. Becky looked me straight in the eyes and said, "No, you're going on this trip. The kids will stay with your parents as we arranged. I don't plan on being alone for the next 2 weeks, and I don't want you around to cause any trouble or try to find out who I'll be with. You need this time away to process everything. I've made sure you'll actually go on this trip, and you won't like the consequences if you don't. You'll regret it if you change your plans now. My friends and I have everything covered. We have sources in town and almost everywhere you might go. If you try anything to find out about my lover or disrupt our lives, I'll find out, and you'll face serious consequences. You have to accept that my plan is solid, and it's what's best for me. If you cooperate, I'll make sure you don't have a miserable life. You'll continue living much like you have been." Becky went over to the desk and took out a thick envelope from her drawer of papers. She came back to me and handed it over. "Here, so you'll believe me. We made a written report of all your actions for the past month. Read it and you'll see we have it all down. We're aware of everything you do, and if you try to interfere with our plans, we'll know, and I won't go easy on you. Now I'm heading to bed. If you want some action tonight, come up. You'll see not much has to change unless you start causing trouble." I sat there in shock. Who was this woman? And what happened to my wife? I thought I knew her, but now I discover she's conniving and unfaithful. I watched her go upstairs, her hips swaying seductively. She knew she looked amazing and she was using it tonight, but for once, it didn't faze me at all. Finally, I opened the envelope and started reading. I was shocked. The report on me was incredibly detailed, capturing things I'd forgotten until I read them. It seemed like someone had been monitoring my every move, noting even minor incidents like spilling something on my shirt. It documented my glances at other women, something natural for anyone. The thoroughness of the report made me wonder if someone wealthy or connected was behind it, given its detail and scope. The report contained private details, including conversations I thought were private. This made me question if I was being bugged. As I considered my next steps, particularly how to leave my cheating wife without losing out in a divorce, I realized I needed advice. My lifelong friends, who shared a complicated history with me and Becky, seemed like the go-to, but then a dreadful thought struck me. What if Becky was involved with one of them? Seeking their counsel could backfire if the traitor was among them, sabotaging my plans before they even started. Just as I was deep in thought, Becky called out from the top of the stairs, provocatively suggesting I join her in bed rather than mulling over things alone. She then returned to our bedroom, leaving me to consider my next move in this complex situation. I never did go to bed. I spent the night on the couch in the den. Becky woke me up when she started making breakfast. She was mad and made sure I knew it. "Get your sorry butt up, Dave. You need to clean up and get ready for work before the kids notice you didn't sleep in your own room last night. When you come back in 2 weeks, I expect you to act normal. If you mess things up in the family, I've already warned you about the consequences. I'm willing to meet your needs sometimes, but I expect you to do your part too. Just so you know, if you find another woman, I'm filing for divorce." I could feel the rage building up inside me. I yelled, "What's going on? You can mess around and think it's fine, but I can't do the same? Not that I want to, but why is it okay for you and not for me?" Becky smirked and said, "Come on, Dave. We both know you're satisfied with what you're getting from me now. If you go out looking for someone else, it's just to get back at me. I only seek outside the marriage because you're not meeting my needs as a husband. If you could give me what I need, I wouldn't have to look elsewhere, and I expect the same from you." I stammered. I was so mad I could barely talk, but I finally managed to respond. "I can't believe this. You never once talked to me about needing more or wanting to try something different in bed. You never asked me to do anything we don't normally do. How was I supposed to know you wanted something else if you never told me? I always made sure you were satisfied. Most of the time, you had multiple orgasms before we were done. How could I know something was missing when you acted like everything was fine and I was happy?" Becky stood there, then said, "Well, if you're asking now, you're really clueless, huh? It's not just about quantity, dear. It's about quality. You never learned how to please me, and I realized you never would. So I started getting what I needed elsewhere. Now, get dressed. I'm tired of hearing you complain." I went upstairs and went through my usual morning routine. We had a quiet breakfast, and when our son Sean asked what was wrong, I started to explain. But Becky interrupted, saying, "Your father's just dealing with a little issue. He'll be fine after his vacation." She shot me a glare before focusing on her breakfast. At work, I decided to ignore some of Becky's advice and canceled my trip with the guys. We were supposed to leave straight from work and meet at our favorite Denny's to drive together. I had a spacious F-150 truck, so we'd load our gear into it. Roger would ride with me, and Don would take his car since he had to return on Wednesday. I talked to Roger, explaining that something had come up, and I couldn't make it. I offered to let him use my truck to haul the gear. Roger exclaimed, "Oh, Dave, that's not happening. I just spoke to Becky, and she warned me you might try this. She mentioned you've been stressed lately, but she checked with your secretary and confirmed you have nothing important scheduled. I promised her I'd ensure you take this trip. If I have to, I'll come find you. You're coming with us, and you're going to enjoy yourself." I started to object and refuse outright, but then I felt a twinge of fear. What if Roger was... No, Becky said she was leaving this weekend, and Roger was joining me. But wait, Kenny was staying home and coming up midweek. Could it be him or someone else? I was stuck. I needed to think more and make plans. I wanted to buy some surveillance equipment, but how? From the report I read, Becky and her friends tracked my credit card purchases, phone calls, and even cash withdrawals. They could spot unusual spending overnight. I was sitting at my desk, lost in thought, when Becky called. As soon as I answered, she launched into a tirade. "David, I told you to go on your trip, and it's not wise for you to try to snoop into my affairs. Roger just informed me that you tried to back out. This is your final warning. Don't mess with me, or you'll lose everything and never see your children again. Do you understand this time?" She hung up abruptly, leaving me stunned once again. Roger had betrayed me. Did that mean he was involved, or was he genuinely concerned for me? Come to think of it, my old friends didn't seem as close as they used to be. It felt like they were now Becky's friends, and I was just tagging along. Could it be? Nah, not all of them. Anyway, I decided to go on the trip and met the guys at Denny's. While they were joking around, I sat gloomily. Finally, Don asked me what was wrong. I hesitated for a moment, then said, "Becky has some crazy idea, and I don't know how to deal with it. I can hardly believe she meant what she said, but if she did, my marriage is in trouble." Roger glanced at Don and remarked, "You know Becky's style, Don. She rang me up earlier today saying Loverboy here was trying to bail on our trip. She mentioned he's been on edge and hard to deal with lately and could use this time off to clear his head. I assured her we'd ensure he joined us and had a good time." Don chimed in, "Yeah, I've noticed his moodiness too over the past few months. He hasn't been as lively with us. A little adjustment in attitude won't hurt. And we can help with that. I've got beer and his favorite whiskey in my car." Turning to me, he added, "Nothing used to stop us from enjoying our cabin time. Sure, the ladies won't be there this time, but hey, more drinks and stories for us." We headed out, driving to the fishing spot by the stream. It was a short 2-hour ride, and we arrived in time for some serious drinking before bed. The next morning, both guys insisted on fishing, so we set off. The fishing helped me forget about the past few days, but thoughts of Becky crept back as we returned to the cabin. I couldn't believe she meant what she said, but it lingered in my mind. Instead of focusing on what I needed to do, I let the guys convince me to keep drinking with them. Later, During supper, as we continued drinking, Don looked at me and asked, "Okay, Dave, spill it. You look like you lost your best buddy, but I'm still here. What's eating you?" I thought, why not? If I didn't talk to someone I trusted, I'd lose it. These guys were trustworthy. We'd been pals since school started. I spilled the beans to Don and Roger about my marriage's declining bed life over the last 3 years and Becky's bombshell from Thursday evening. After I finished, Don looked at me and said, "Wow, Dave, are you sure that's what Becky said? I can't believe she'd even think something like that. We've known her for years and she's the sweetest, most caring woman I know." "Yeah, I know, but that's exactly what she said as far as I recall." "Is it really true?" Don leaned back and said, "Well, Dave, I can't predict the outcome of a divorce, but she's right about some things. If she's really doing what you say, you have to decide how to handle it. If she's discreet, you need to consider if breaking up the family and the emotional toll on the children, you and Becky, is worth it. In custody battles, the courts usually favor the mother. Unless she's proven unfit, you'd likely lose custody of your kids. It's true you'd have to financially support them until they're grown, including college expenses. Because she doesn't work, you'd have to pay alimony until she remarries. You might lose your home, either giving it to her or selling it and splitting the money. You'd also have to share your savings and retirement funds. Child support is calculated by a formula that heavily burdens the supporting parent. Expect to lose a big chunk of your income for child support. You'd also need to provide health care for the kids." Dave was stunned. Hearing his attorney friend lay out the situation was even worse than Becky warning him about the consequences of her infidelity. "I have to know. She won't tell me whom she is with, and I need to know. When I find out, I will make sure she isn't with him any longer." "Dave, as your friend, I get where you're coming from. But as a court officer, I have to advise against that. It's tough, but I'm obligated to report these things. If harm comes to any of Becky's lovers, I'll have to report you. My suggestion? Just deal with it and keep things normal. Maybe if she's cheating, she'll change her mind or get it out of her system. Either way, it seems like sticking to the status quo would be better for you." "Don, I can't believe you're saying this. How would you feel if Shelley did something like that and threatened you? Would you just accept her cheating like Becky expects me to?" Don looked uneasy and said, "No, I'd probably be as upset as you are. But I trust Shelley wouldn't do that. She loves me and knows I'm the best partner she could have. I provide for our family and she wouldn't risk losing that or hurting our kids or me. Buddy, you should just accept your situation. If Becky's as vigilant as you say based on that report, you're in trouble. If you try to investigate her affair, she'll find out and retaliate. Heck, she might even know about this conversation if she's monitoring you closely. Did she know where we were going? Shoot, I didn't even think about that. Darn it, now I have more to worry about." Dave was confused by Roger's constant smile and Don's oddly happy expression during their conversation. He couldn't believe his friends were so relaxed about Becky treating him badly. Finally, he sighed, "Well, forget it. Let's just have some more drinks." The next morning, Dave woke up before his friends. Feeling the need for solitude, he grabbed his fishing gear and headed upstream to his favorite spot. Just as he was about to start fishing, his cell phone rang. He always kept it with him, although reception was spotty in some areas due to weak signals. He was surprised to get reception here. Seeing it was Becky calling, he chose not to answer. After Becky left a message, he listened to it. He was shocked to hear her say, "Well, honey, my sources say you got some good advice from Don last night. I hope you're going to follow it. I love you, and you're too good of a provider and father to lose. But if you do something foolish, I can manage the kids without you. Now have fun." Dave stared at the phone in disbelief. He knew the cabin didn't have cell service, and there was no landline. So how did she find out about his conversation with the guys? Oh no, his gear must be bugged, and someone must be nearby to pick up the transmission. He needed to search for it later. Dave didn't notice Roger and Don standing at the edge of the trees while he listened to the message. They grinned, gave each other a thumbs up, then vanished back into the woods, heading towards the cabin. Roger glanced at Don and asked, "Do you think that'll do it? Or should we keep the pressure on for a bit?" "I reckon we should keep those detailed reports going for a month or two, and we got to keep urging him to just accept it," Don replied. "We've got a good thing happening now. If we can persuade him to let Becky keep fooling around and spend some full nights and weekends with us, we'll be way ahead. Imagine how much better it'll be to have longer sessions with her without any time constraints. She's so hooked on what we give her in bed that she'll do anything we say just to have more. If we play it smart, he can clue in our wives about the issue, and we can tell them we're out at night helping him figure out what's going on. That'll be solid cover." Dave fished until nearly noon, but his mind wasn't on it. He spent most of his time pondering his marriage, trying to figure out how to uncover Becky's affair, end it, and get back at her. However, he knew he couldn't do anything until he found out who, when, where, and why, if possible. On a cozy Friday evening, as the anticipation of their friend's arrival grew, Becky and the man beside her shared a warm, intimate moment. After spending the day preparing for a weekend at the cabin, they finally had some time to themselves. Becky, feeling playful and affectionate, approached him with a twinkle in her eye. She handed him a drink and sat close, their conversation flowing easily. The atmosphere was charged with excitement for the weekend ahead. They shared laughs, reminisced about past adventures, and eagerly discussed plans for the days to come. As they sat together, the connection between them deepened. Becky, feeling bold, leaned in for a tender kiss, which he warmly reciprocated. Their affectionate exchange soon turned into a gentle caress, as they continued to express their fondness for each other. Becky, feeling the warmth of the moment, whispered sweet nothings into his ear. The air was filled with anticipation, not just for the immediate tenderness they shared, but also for the joy that the coming days with their friends would bring. They talked about their friend's upcoming arrival, speculating with excitement about the activities they had planned. The mention of a friend's expected visit on Wednesday added to the bubbling excitement, sparking further conversation about the adventures that awaited them. As the evening progressed, they remained close, cherishing each other's company. Their connection was a testament to their deep bond, one that was amplified by the shared joy of the imminent reunion with their close friends. In that moment, they were reminded of the simple pleasures of companionship, the anticipation of good times ahead, and the beauty of moments spent with someone special. Becky exclaimed, "Oh God, I've been craving this for so long. I can't wait for the others to arrive. Isn't Dawn supposed to be here early Wednesday?" "Yeah, baby. Then you'll have both of us for 2 whole nights before I have to help babysit your loving hubby." "Oh God, I'll be so relieved when we can all 3 be together at once. Just being with 1 or 2 of you at a time has been tough after what you've done to me. There's no way Dave alone can satisfy me anymore. Do you think we've covered everything? I adore him, and he's a wonderful provider and father. I don't want to lose him." "Yeah, I think we can keep him in check." "Yeah, I just hope Dave doesn't start confiding in our wives and causing trouble. We've been doing fine the last 3 years. I think we should have been content with how things were instead of getting greedy like this. Having you to ourselves all night or on a long trip sounds nice, but I'm not sure we can push Dave this hard. We might have unleashed something uncontrollable." "Well, the bugs we planted and the few things we found that make him look bad should make him back off. I just wish he wasn't so straight and honorable. It's unbelievable we haven't found anything shady he's done. How can a man in business for himself not take advantage of situations to make extra cash? Oh, by the way, Becky, are you still keeping an eye on the finances and transactions like we discussed? Yeah, I convinced the bank to limit his cash withdrawals, but I can't control his check writing. At least we can track them if he does. I wish I had a way to monitor the business more closely. Now I regret pushing him to hire office help so I could stay home with the kids and be a housewife." Becky chuckled, then added, "Of course, if I hadn't insisted on staying home, we wouldn't be having as much fun, would we? I was so frustrated only being with you all a couple nights a month or on trips. Being a stay-at-home mom allowed us to play more. And now, with this plan, we can play whenever we want." Dave was gloomy and preoccupied by the river. His friends attempted to chat with him and lift his spirits, but they weren't making much headway. They got him drunk on Tuesday evening. After he passed out from intoxication, Don and Roger retreated to the porch to converse quietly. Roger expressed concern, saying, "I'm starting to fret, Don. We've been talking to him for 4 days, and if anything, he's becoming more determined to leave Becky and seek revenge on her lover. He's on the brink of exploding and going wild. How are we going to manage this situation now? It all seemed so promising and simple when we devised the plan to control him and spend more time with her. What if he finds out and tells our wives?" Don reassured him, saying, "Relax, Roger. I can manipulate him in the divorce proceedings and paint her as an angel. Even if she does divorce him, so what? We only embarked on this because she said she wanted to keep him around. I'll admit, banging her while she's married to him gives me a thrill, but she'd still be just as enjoyable if she weren't married. We just need to prevent him and our wives from discovering the truth so we don't get screwed over. We might need to resort to some physical persuasion, but let's wait and see how things unfold in a week or 2. Dave couldn't hear the conversation clearly, but he had awakened and caught snippets of their discussion on the front porch. He understood they were upset that he was stubborn about accepting Becky's infidelity, and they believed they needed to convince him to be more tolerant. Now, not only was he angry with her, but he was also angry with them. Before drifting back to sleep, he resolved to handle the situation without their assistance. Over the next few days, Dave grew more distant from his friends. Roger and Kenny grew genuinely concerned when all he would say about the situation was, "I'm going to find out who the woman is sleeping with, and both she and they are going to pay big time." Finally, the day arrived for them to head home. Once again, Roger rode with Dave, but there was no conversation in the truck. Kenny drove his own car, and as soon as they reached an area with good cell service, he called Don. Don and Becky sat in Dave's living room and listened as Kenny reported on Dave. "He's boiling with anger. If anything, he's even more determined to make you pay than he was when I got to the cabin. I'm not sure what to do, but I think we should lay low until he calms down. If he catches us, it could get ugly." Becky sat in shock, tears streaming down her cheeks, and she was almost hyperventilating. Don, with clenched jaws and a red face, sat beside her. After a brief conversation with Kenny, Don turned to Becky. He pulled her close and began caressing her breasts to calm her down. As he touched her, he said, "Becky, don't worry. I didn't want to resort to drastic measures if we didn't have to. But it seems like we have no choice now. See how he behaves this weekend and let me know on Sunday evening. If it seems like he's going to cause trouble, we'll file on Monday. I can freeze all your personal accounts, and I believe I can freeze the business accounts pending court approval for all expenditures. We can convince the judge that he might drain your accounts and ruin the business if we don't take control." Dave came home late on Friday night and found Becky in the living room, looking upset as though she had been crying. She seemed disheveled and was only wearing one of his shirts. As Dave walked by, he noticed something odd about her appearance that made him very upset. Becky looked at him defiantly and seemed to be provoking him with her posture. Dave was really angry and just walked by Becky without saying anything. Becky tried to follow him into their bedroom and even attempted to join him in the shower, but Dave firmly told her to leave, expressing his disappointment and anger about the situation. He told her that he had hoped they could resolve their issues, but now he felt there was no chance for that. Dave warned Becky that even though she had hurt him, he would find a way to respond to her actions and those of the person or people she was involved with. After getting himself together, Dave quickly packed his things into his truck, going back and forth from the house. While packing, he overheard Becky on the phone. One of the last things he tried to do before leaving was to transfer money from their joint bank accounts. But he discovered he was locked out because the password had been changed. This made him even more angry. Turning around, he saw Becky watching him, which only added to his frustration. Becky appeared remorseful as she spoke. "I hoped you'd come to your senses and we wouldn't reach this point. You realize you're making a grave mistake, right? I love you more than any man I've ever known. I don't want to lose you. If you persist, you'll risk losing the business and everything we've built. Just so you're aware, I've hired Don as my lawyer. I just spoke with him and informed him of your behavior. He'll be in touch." Dave was stunned. He knew Don was also her friend, but geez, he'd been Dave's attorney since he started practicing law. He couldn't believe Don would betray him like this. Dave left his home and drove straight to his office and warehouse complex. He planned to stay in his office and conference room for a while. On the way in, he stopped at the gate and spoke to the guard. "I'm having some trouble with my wife. She and her lover have threatened me. I need you to call in extra security and keep all unauthorized persons off the property." Saturday morning around 10 a.m., Dave was leaving the complex to grab breakfast when he got halted at the gate. A man approached him, confirmed his identity, then handed him an envelope saying, "You've been served." After the man left, Dave opened the envelope and found a restraining order. It stated that he couldn't come within 300 feet of his wife, children, or their home. Additionally, there was an order requiring court approval for any expenditures from his personal or business accounts, preventing him from depleting the company's assets before divorce proceedings, which were set to start the following Monday. After breakfast, Dave went to his assistant's house. When she opened the door, she remarked, "Dave, you look awful. What's wrong?" "I need to talk. I need help, and you're the only person I can trust. I'm sorry to bother you on the weekend, but I'm in trouble, and I have no idea who I can trust or talk to. She stepped back and gestured for Dave to come in. "Come on in, Dave. Would you like some coffee?" Dave followed her into the kitchen, where he saw her husband, Thaddeus, sitting at the table. It seemed he had interrupted their brunch, as there were plates with eggs still on the table. "I'm sorry. I guess I should leave. Thaddeus looked up at Dave and said, "You look terrible, Dave. Sit down and talk to us, for heaven's sake." Dave slowly recounted to the couple everything that had happened in his life since 2 weeks ago Thursday. Then he expressed, "I'm at a loss for what to do now or how to help myself. My supposed best friends spent the last 2 weeks urging me to let Becky continue her affair on the side. They argue that since she's been doing it for years and I never noticed, why should I disrupt things? And now, Don, my former best friend, is collaborating with Becky as her attorney, entangling me in legal complications. I can't even spend money without court approval, and I can't get that until at least Monday. My best friend has taken Becky's case, so I'm cut off there. I'm not even sure I have enough money to eat. All my credit cards were declined when I tried to pay for breakfast." Gertrude leaned back and said, "Dave, I can't believe Becky would do this to you." She turned to her husband and asked, "Thad, can't we offer him some financial assistance?" Her husband nodded in agreement. Dave sat at the table feeling angry, helpless, and determined to seek retribution like never before. Thad pondered for a moment before stating, "If what you say is true, you need some serious help. I just hope there isn't a bug hidden in your clothes somewhere." His eyes narrowed, and he added, "Come with me, Dave." They headed downstairs into the walkout basement. Stopping at the bottom of the stairs, Thad instructed, "Dave, undress right now and give me your clothes. There's a shower over there, and I'll bring you some of my clothes to wear. I'll take yours to the front door. After you've cleaned up, we'll talk. I doubt there's a bug in our house, but they might have followed you here and planted a listening device outside." Dave changed into some old sweatpants belonging to Thad, and then all three of them retreated into a cement storm shelter beneath the stairway. He felt foolish as he began to speak, but Thad and Gertrude stopped him. They spent the next hour communicating through written notes, planning out their course of action. After covering all possible scenarios, Thad left to contact individuals whom he believed could assist Dave. They agreed that Dave would have minimal interaction with these people, and Thad and Gertrude would lend him the necessary funds to start the investigation. While it was assumed that Becky would halt her activities, they planned to monitor her and Dave's 3 friends for a while. On Sunday, Dave, Thad, and Gertrude decided to catch up over lunch, enjoying each other's company and sharing laughs. At the same time, Becky hosted a meeting at her house with Don, Kenny, and Roger to discuss some pressing matters. After their meeting concluded, they all took a moment to relax and share their thoughts on the situation. Roger, looking concerned, broke the silence. "I'm feeling uneasy about all this," he admitted. "I'm not sure if it was a good idea to meet today. What if Dave finds out we were here? Maybe we should keep a low profile until we figure things out. We had a stable situation for over 3 years, and pushing the boundaries now seems risky. I'm worried this might not end well for us." He continued to share his anxieties about recent events, expressing doubt over their strategy and concern over Dave's recent activities, particularly his time spent with his secretary and her husband. Roger mentioned that their surveillance hadn't picked up anything suspicious, but he was still nervous about the potential repercussions of their actions and decisions. "Stop complaining. We've got Dave completely under control. He's unable to access any money, and we're keeping such close tabs on him that we'll know his every move before he even makes it. Right now, he's with his personal assistant and her husband, feeling sorry for himself. If he tries to leave, we'll be alerted before he's even out of sight. He can't even make a call without us knowing what he's saying, whether it's from his phone or hers." On Monday morning, Dave started searching for a new attorney to represent him. He spoke with several and scheduled appointments with 2. It was a challenge for him because Don had been his legal counsel for years, but now that Don was representing Becky, he had to find someone else. Eventually, he decided to hire Sally Hawk, who impressed him during the interview and came highly recommended. Their first course of action was to initiate legal proceedings to release Dave's business accounts and secure enough funds for his living expenses. They also opted to hire another private investigator firm to monitor Becky. Dave authorized wiretaps on his house and video surveillance. Furthermore, he gave Sally the green light to start divorce proceedings based on adultery. Later that evening, Thad handed Dave the footage captured the previous day. Naturally, Dave was devastated. Discovering that Becky was involved with all 3 of his friends only fueled his anger further. However, he now knew who he was up against. The following morning, he went to his office and made 5 copies of the CD. He distributed one to each of his friends' wives, one to his attorney, kept one for himself, and placed the original in a safe deposit box. Additionally, he uploaded the video to various amateur XXX sites on the internet, using the participants' real names. He set up the site as pay-per-view, with the funds directed from a PayPal account to a bank in the Cayman Islands. He smirked, realizing Don had given him a key to his office, allowing Dave to set up the site from there, implicating Don if the tracing led back. Dave also sent still images of Becky's actions to several of her friends and family members via email. He executed all of this, using the free computers at the college library to avoid suspicion. Although he briefly considered using Don's office, he dismissed the idea, knowing it would appear suspicious as Don wouldn't engage in such activities. Using the college computers was straightforward for Dave. He had done so multiple times before without getting caught. Despite the requirement of a student ID card and password for logging in, Dave often found machines left logged on, allowing him to use someone else's credentials. Moreover, the lack of CCTV security cameras at the local college meant he didn't need to worry about being captured on video in the vicinity. On Wednesday, Dave had a blast fielding phone calls from people who had watched the video. In the early afternoon, Becky called him in tears. She asked, "How could you do that? I thought you loved me. I told you it was just Zex because you couldn't give me what I needed. How could you ruin my life like that?" Dave chuckled and replied, "Rebecca, I didn't ruin your life. You did. I'm just delivering the payback I promised if you went through with your plans. Frankly, now that I think about it, I'm pretty sure you've been cheating on me for a while. There were plenty of times when one of the guys would make sure I was out and I'd come home late. A lot of things that didn't add up then make sense now. By the time I'm done with you and those jerks, you'll regret ever doing this." Later that afternoon, Becky's sister called. She said, "You poor fool. Looks like you finally figured out about your oh-so-perfect wife. I assume you're the one who sent this video. Well, now it seems she and I can share the boys. I didn't know she was with them until I got this." Dave shuddered as she hung up, her maniacal laughter echoing in his mind all night. Don also called, and as soon as Dave answered, he started yelling. Dave played along upon realizing it was Don. He kept Don on the line for almost 15 minutes. Don made threats of both physical and legal harm, saying, "You jerk. By the time I'm through with you, you'll wish you never crossed me. I'll have your wife whenever I want, and we'll have most of your money too. If you had just done what I told her, you'd still have a family, money, and a life. After I'm done with you, I'll have the guys rough you up. I've been with that girl since high school, and I'll continue to be long after you're gone, you jerk. Enjoy living in the dumps because that's where you'll be when I'm through. I'll file every lawsuit I can find and bleed you dry just to defend against them." Later calls from Becky's parents were distressing. Her mother was in tears as she asked, "Dave, how could you do this to Becky? I understand she hurt you deeply, but spreading pictures of her everywhere was too vengeful. Couldn't you have resolved this in a more civilized way?" By the time Dave decided to head home for the evening, he felt content with his actions so far. He was confident that the computerized answering system his company had installed would prove its worth, especially from the recordings it made that day alone. Initially, he had concerns about how his then-attorney and friend Don advised him to set up the system with the telecom provider. When a call came in, the computer would answer and give a warning before recording began. The warning stated, "Thank you for calling Central U.S. Inventory, Logistics, and Security Company. All phone calls are recorded for later use. If you do not want your call recorded, please hang up now. If you wish to speak to someone, please press 0 to be connected to an operator." It seemed Don either didn't consider the warning or was too furious to heed it, because all his threats and boasting were captured after the warning he insisted on including in the system. Dave saw this as poetic justice. Unfortunately, all the individuals involved in Becky's circle stopped associating with her once the legal cases were initiated. Fortunately, Thad's acquaintance managed to capture video and audio recordings on the first Saturday, as none of the private investigators recorded any incriminating evidence. While some suspicious phone calls were obtained, they were mostly ambiguous and of little use. One of Sally's initial actions was to report Don to the State Bar Association. His law license was promptly suspended, and he was permanently disbarred due to his unethical conduct and threats, even before the divorce and legal proceedings concluded. Dave's divorce was finalized, with Becky receiving a small portion, around 25%, of the marital assets. Dave retained ownership of his company. Furthermore, Dave was granted custody of the children, primarily due to a subtle detail initially overlooked. During the photo session, when Thad's acquaintance captured images of Becky and the others, they inadvertently photographed another individual. This picture not only captured the scene of the event, but also showed a child peeking into the house from the backyard through the patio door. When the judge saw this evidence, full custody of the children was awarded to Dave. Dave's legal actions against Don proved highly successful. He was awarded $1.3 million in damages for breaching attorney-client privilege and for Don's misconduct in representing Becky while still acting as Dave's attorney. Don faced censure for his inappropriate relationship with Becky and various ethical violations, leading to fines payable to the state. As Dave pursued legal recourse against Don, Don's financial situation deteriorated significantly, nearing bankruptcy. Meanwhile, Shelley, Don's wife, depleted most of their remaining marital assets during their divorce. Similarly, Pam, Kenny's wife, received a significant portion of his assets after their divorce. Surprisingly, Roger and Trixie remained married, as it was revealed that Trixie had willingly engaged in the group's activities. However, Roger grew discontented with his friend's continued exploitation of Trixie. When Don and Kenny moved in with Roger after being ousted from their homes, tensions escalated. Kenny's frustration boiled over one evening, leading to a violent altercation where he assaulted Don and Roger. Kenny was hospitalized due to injuries sustained in the fight, and Don and Kenny were subsequently convicted and sentenced to a year in jail. Consequently, Roger and Trixie ended their marriage. Reflecting on these events nearly a year later, Dave and Gertrude discussed a news article detailing the conflict involving Don, Kenny, and Roger over Trixie. Gertrude then inquired whether Dave maintained any contact with Rebecca, noting her supervised visits with their children. Dave glanced at her and replied firmly, "No, we only communicate when necessary, usually about the kids. I have no interest in speaking with her, and if I could avoid it entirely, I would." "I was just curious. You two seemed perfect for years, and then—" "Well, I've always wondered if you knew why she did what she did. I just can't comprehend why a woman who loves her husband would act that way." Dave gazed at Gertrude, feeling a knot form in his stomach. He clenched his jaw and bit his lip before reaching into his desk drawer. Retrieving a folder, he handed it to Gertrude. "I don't know why I held on to this letter. I'm not even sure why I agreed to read it. Remember when Becky's mother visited the office in tears about 7 months ago? She gave me this letter and insisted I read it before she left, so I did." Gertrude opened the folder and read the following. "Dear David, you may question why I still call you dearest, but despite everything, you're the man I love. I've made mistakes that hurt you, and for that, I'm deeply sorry. My actions weren't intentional, but I need to come clean about them. Our past relationships with our high school friends were complicated, but they didn't affect us until I made a mistake on our 9th anniversary. You were busy with work, and I ended up drinking too much at a Valentine's Day party. Feeling lonely, things took a turn when Don and Kenny drove me home. Reminiscing about past encounters led to a moment of weakness where I gave in to temptation with them. That night, I experienced feelings and pleasures that were intense and new. This led to more encounters with them, sometimes individually or together, whenever you were away. These moments were filled with excitement and fear of getting caught, which somehow added to the thrill. Don later suggested an arrangement to avoid the risk of getting caught, believing you might accept it to keep our family intact. I convinced myself you might agree, hoping to avoid losing you and our children. But I realize now how much pain and betrayal my actions have caused you. I'm truly sorry for the hurt I've caused. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Yours always, Becky." Gertrude glanced up after reading the letter. Her eyes were teary, but she held back her anger. "Dave, I truly believe she still loves you more than anyone else. I know she's hurting. But Dave, she was nearly as much a victim as you were. I think your friend Don was a predator. You know, over the years, we've both heard some terrible rumors about him. I wouldn't be surprised if he intentionally got her drunk that first night. No man of high moral character, no true friend would take advantage of her like she said he did." "Yeah, I know, Gertie, but... well, I'm not entirely sure she gave me the whole truth there. She always seemed to pay more attention to Don than I would have liked. I brushed it off, but there were several times we argued after a party because I thought she was too friendly, letting him take too many liberties. But I never caught them in anything substantial to confront them about. I have to admit, after Don's phone call when I finally caught them, thanks to you and Thad, I had enough doubts to get DNA tests done on the children. You can't imagine how relieved I was when the test confirmed I was their father. Well, anyway, I believe she thinks she loves me, but I don't think it's genuine love. It's more like infatuation, maybe a deep affection. I was easy to live with, a good provider and father. I now realize I was probably her last choice, and we married because... Well, I'm not sure why she married me. I loved her deeply, but I don't think she felt that same depth of love for me. I believe that's why she cheated and continued to do so. She was selfish and only cared about her own pleasure, needs, and desires.